Welcome to Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times, presented by Worth Wealth Management, a weekly conversation with area leaders about how to persevere during uncertain times. Now here's your host, Gary Shorman.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times. And the other day I walked into, I guess what I call our voting place, and there's a sign up that says, "Go vote." Well, voting is, as we found out, can be a challenging thing. And there's a go vote sign here, and it's like, what am I missing? What should I be doing? Come to find out, we're in the presidential primary voting time. And who else to talk about why that's going on, what's taking place, and what we should do is our Secretary of State, the Kansas Secretary of State, Scott Schwab. Scott, good to have you with us today.
Hey, honored to be here and glad to get the opportunity to talk about this upcoming election.
Well, there's an election going on, but there's not a lot of talk. You hear the talk about nationally, it was Super Tuesday last Tuesday. You have things going on taking place. This will run after the State of the Union. You hear all the political stuff. Kansas plays a different role in that. But first off, let's talk about what's going on in Kansas right now for the presidential primary.
Yeah, so last legislative session, it was about March of last year, there was a concern with both major political parties' leadership. And the leadership of those parties were a little concerned about what it would take to do a presidential caucus, which is typically what the political parties in Kansas do. So they passed a law. It was interesting because we've always had a presidential preference primary in statute, but then we would just delay it a year and not do it during presidential years. So we finally got rid of it, and the year after we got rid of it, they bring it right back because we haven't had one since the early 90s. But first off, it's called a presidential preference primary, because normally when you have a primary and in August, whoever wins that primary, their name is on the ballot in November. If coming around on the 19th, let's say Nikki Haley wins the state of Kansas, as we found out this week, her name is not going to be on the ballot in November. So it's still important to vote, especially if you don't want Biden as a Democrat or you didn't want Trump as a Republican. You can still go out and vote for other people. Or if you're really big supporters of those two leading candidates, you can go out there and just try to pump the volume on those candidates. But it's rarely does Kansas have a one contest election, but that's what this is. It's a contest just for who the parties want for their preference to be a presidential nominee for their party.
Well, I can't say this doesn't sound right. It sounds like a yawner to me because, all the stakes have already gone on. The stakes, we know who's going to be there. Why go to the energy to vote?
Well, it's not that much energy for one thing. I mean, voting in Kansas has always been pretty easy and simple. And and if you don't want to, that's absolutely, you're right. That was part of our concern when the legislature was advancing this bill, is that it may be not very relevant because the nominees may be decided by then. And that seems to be mostly the case now, as it's going to be Trump versus Biden. And it looks like that it's wrapping up. But the legislature still wanted to do it. They put $5 million to make sure counties will reimburse for having to do a third election this year. And it's too late to go back because they've already printed ballots and programmed machines and hired poll workers and all the things. So they're just going to have to go ahead and go forward and do it. I think the results will be interesting. I don't know how much the turnout will be since Super Tuesday was so heavy towards Trump. As a heavily Republican state, I think that's the bigger contest Kansans are worried about. I don't see the Democrat Party going against an incumbent Democrat president. So regardless, though, there's still the presidential preference primary, and those who want to say, hey, I vote in every election, this one counts.
Your job as Secretary of State, and we had a chance to talk to you back in October, and you get involved on the process side of things. How hard has it been to develop the process for just this type of primary? It's a one-off. Again, it's been 20 plus years since we've done this, and the election goes on through, I believe, March 18th. So what's it take from your office to make this happen?
Well, it's the same as any other election because it's a statutory election. All federal laws, the NVRA and, equal rights voting federal laws apply to this election. We still have to get out military ballots and all the things like that. So it's the same as an election we would do typically in an even year, except for it's just the third one. The advantage of this is between COVID and just kind of the rancor and rhetoric of against election workers, we've lost several good election workers over the past several years. We've been able to replace them with quality people, but you lose institutional knowledge when you lose those experienced election workers. Well, having this election just gives them more rehearsal and practice, because the one thing we don't like in election is administrative errors. Because if there's an administrative error, then somebody's going to call that fraud, and it's not fraud, but they're going to call it fraud. And so this just gives them more experience and exposure on an election. And if it's not a high volume voter turnout, it gives them a more opportunity to kind of slow down a little bit and double check the system so they understand, oh, that's right, I got to do X, I got to do Z, because elections are incredibly complex. So this will help them get more rehearsal in the election space and get more experience.
A lot of us out here don't understand the timing of this. Why couldn't we be a part of Super Tuesday so we at least get included with whatever states are red, whatever states are blue, et cetera?
Well, part of the reason why I think they want to delay it is we had an election just last November for local units of government. And so our county clerks just have been working a long time last year to do an election. And then they also have tax notices coming out. They needed some margin early in the year to catch up on some of those notices. The other issue that they wanted after Super Tuesday was they were hoping it would be the policymakers were hoping it would be a closer contest. So maybe some of those campaigning for the presidential race would come to Kansas. Well, now that it's mostly done, there's likely no one's going to appear in Kansas for this presidential preference primary.
And that sort of drives people to go vote. If you have your candidate shows up, whether you're red or blue, your candidate shows up, you want to go vote. It brings that energy to get out to the polls and do that. How many ways can Kansans vote?
Well, we always have 3 different ways. You can vote by mail, which is too late to ask for that application now. We're past that deadline. But if you got one, you can get a mail ballot. You can either mail it, but we always recommend drop it off at a polling place, drop it off at your clerk's office, or drop it off at a secure state-owned drop box. So if you mail it, it's 90% of those ballots leave the state, and sometimes they come back. We have issues with the post office right now. 2, you can vote early in person. Most counties have started that somewhere around February 28th. So you can go to votekansas.gov. That's our voting website to get the information about where your early in-person voting centers are, and also when those start out. And then 2 or 3, you can vote in person on election day. And while some states are moving away from election day, Kansas still has election day. And I like to vote with my 18-year-old, well, now 20-year-old son on election day. It's something we get to do together. And, it's one of those times where my name's not on the ballot, so he can go vote and not have to worry about dad putting pressure on him. I'm not running for president.
Well, it is a low pressure thing in a sense of who you want, but God, you hate to tell people it's not a big deal because in the whole scope of things, it is a big deal that you go out vote. It's just that the timing, where we are in the whole campaign cycle, it seems like it's not a big deal for those of us in the state of Kansas.
Yeah, it's not as compelling as it was hoped to be. But still, voting is a right. I always let folks know, hey, somebody died for your right to vote. So if you get an opportunity to do it, just still do it. Even if it's not as compelling of a race as you would like it to be, someone still sacrificed their life for you to have the freedom to go vote. And we're self-government. We as government by the people and close to the people, and voting is the best way to have that influence on your government, even if it doesn't seem like it's as compelling as it normally would be.
Now, as I understand it, this is a closed voting process. If you're a registered Republican, you vote Republican. Registered Democrat, you vote Democrat. And you have to declare before you can vote either way. Is that correct?
That's correct. If you're an unaffiliated voter, you need to declare about when you go to vote, which party you're going to register as. And then if you decide you want to be unaffiliated again after the presidential primary, you can do that. But if you want to participate, you do need to be registered either as a Republican. If you want to vote in the Republican presidential preference primary, if you want to do the Democrat side, you need to register as a Democrat.
And you can't vote on both sides or vote more than once?
You cannot vote twice. That's still against the law. One person, one vote. And
Okay,
yes,
well,
we'll
that
be
sounds good.
watching.
Hey, we're going to take a quick break here, Scott. Come back, and I want you to talk a little bit about your website and some of the other projects you're working at the Secretary of State office. I know you guys are buried a lot with things in the process that goes on, keeping our state running forward. We're going to take a break here on Forward Ever, leading in challenging times.
The most successful investors are those that can keep their emotions in check and take a longer-term view at what portfolios will be worth 3 to 5 years down the road. I'd say that's the most important in determining what investor outcomes are. Market corrections will continue in the future. We've seen many of them over the years, only to see equity prices rise higher, and that'll be the case in the future.
Worth Wealth Management, enhancing lives and strengthening families.
Our guest today is Kansas Secretary of State Scott Schwab. We've been talking about the voting process that's going on right now for the presidential preference primary, that you can go out and you can go vote. You can help decide what Kansas chooses as both Republican and Democratic candidates. Scott, we've covered all of those things. How do they find out more about what you do at your office at the Secretary of State? What's the best way to do that?
Well, on the voting side, the best way is to go to votekansas.gov. That's our voter view profile that helps you get down to the county level of who do I contact if I have an issue, if I need help voting. That site, that's an easy site to get resources from. And there's a lot of voting websites out there, but if it doesn't say .gov, it didn't come from us. And so I would be leery because they may be collecting data on you for either political purposes or maybe even nefarious purposes. But that is one of the concerns we often share is, hey, make sure it says .gov. And then you can also go to sos.ks.gov. And that's our overall website, because we do more than just elections. We do business filings, which is a huge win for our office. I'm really proud of the team. I let folks know, when we came into office, we were on what's called an AS400 computer system that was outdated back in the late 80s, really. And we're still on that system, but we've migrated the largest portion of our office filings off that system. They have been migrated to our new server. And so because of that, business filings that used to be every year, we got a law passed with the help of a Johnson County senator to move it to every 2 years. So instead of doing an annual report, it's a biannual report. So if you originated in an even year, you only have to do every even year. If you originated in an odd year, you'll do it every odd year. And so we're just trying to make it less administrative burdens on business owners in Kansas. And that's a simple way to do it, especially if you have several LLCs and series LLCs. It's just that much less paperwork you have to do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What else are you involved with? What are you diving into every day as Secretary of State?
Well, it's changed. I'm now the president of our national association, the National Association of Secretaries of State. I'm the 5th Kansan to hold that spot. So pretty proud of that. Our colleagues. Yeah, I'm pretty proud of it. This is by acclamation from my colleagues, which I really appreciate. It's a bipartisan organization. It's the oldest association specific for government. We were there before the Governors Association was there, which we're pretty proud of. And so, but I'm dealing more with my colleagues across the nation more than I ever have. We're engaged with CISA and Homeland Security coming into this election cycle. Department of Justice, we're engaging more with, because it's just as presidential elections come, so does actors from across the pond that try to create distrust in elections. And while there's a lot of rumors about whether there's fraud, or sometimes there's rumors like in Georgia about election voter suppression, there's never evidence of it. And we're pretty good to show the quality of our work, especially our local clerks. And so, but there's concerns because Russia doesn't want people to trust the elections in Kansas. China does not want citizens to trust their elections in Kansas. So we need to be aware of how they're using social media platforms to just basically stir the nest, to make it show like the Western American idea didn't work. And I say it's still working pretty good.
So many of our records are on computers. You mentioned the computer system, the transition from an older system to the newer system. There are some parts of the state, some medical things that ended up really shut down for a few weeks. Is that part of the issue that you ever deal with every day, or you feel very secure about where we are?
Our system right now is very secure. I know, like I have no say over the judicial issue that they had because they're a separate branch of government. But our system is very secure. Now, it is today. Is it going to be secure tomorrow? So we have to be very vigilant about keeping up on our software updates and reading what those updates are for and knowing before we install them on our system. And then we also work with our National Guard. They have a cyber unit, and we share computer roles with them so that if there's something nefarious that is popping up, they can compare it with other computer roles and logs that they share information with, and they can say, hey, this is a potential breach, or there was a breach. We have folks from overseas constantly pinging our system, but we just don't want them to get through. And so far they haven't. And what they're going to get is data, most of which our office is open records anyway. So I'm not as concerned about them getting data. I'm more concerned about them manipulating data. And that's where, where some folks are really worried about the voter machines on election day. I'm not worried about them because they're not connected to a network. And you have a paper ballot. Every county has a paper ballot that counts. My concern is the poll book, the e-poll book. Ever since Help America Vote Act passed, you have to have a real-time correction on your poll book. So if you move from Grant County to Sedgwick County, once you filed a vote in Sedgwick County, you're immediately removed from Grant County, so it prevents double voting. Well, that's on a network. And my concern is I don't want to wake up during the election day and all of a sudden the data is deleted or manipulated. That's going to cause frustration. So we are very vigilant about protecting that system.
I know as part of your national association, as Secretary of State, leadership is so important, especially during election times. And that's what this program's about. Do you ever leave those meetings thankful that you're a part of the Kansas group and Kansas Secretary of State versus some of the other states that seem to just have a ton of challenges?
Yeah, it's an honor for me because I can showcase the state of Kansas. Here's how we do it, and I'm proud of the election system in Kansas. And other states often borrow ideas from us. In 2020, Georgia and Missouri didn't understand voter ID for advanced mail ballots, and so we showed them how we did it. They modified it some for their own purposes, but because every state's different. But one of the most rewarding parts is being able to showcase the state I love. I absolutely love the state of Kansas. The other thing that's really have fun with, I would say, I call it fun because I'm sanguine, but it's an advantage. Is because I'm president of the association, I can call that CISA director. I can make those phone calls in the federal government if we notice as secretaries across the state they're doing something we don't like, or they're not doing something we need them to do. They're a phone call away from me. And that's a huge advantage as opposed to trying to set up a formal meeting.
Well, I appreciate your time today doing this. Last thing, why should people go vote? There's an X big thing out there that says go vote. At the office you'll drive by, you'll see those go vote signs. Why should they do it?
Because you have a right to do it. It costs somebody their life for you to have a right to vote. And it still says something when it comes to the margins of who wins these primaries for Democrats and Republicans. If you want the president, of course, you would want him boosted as a Democrat. If you wanted Trump, you'd want those numbers boosted. If you didn't want Trump and you want those folks to listen to you, maybe you vote for Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis to pump up numbers to show, hey, we're not all on board, or vice versa with the Democrat side. Maybe you vote for a Palmer who says, hey, we're not on board with the president. Your voice still matters because every time there's an election, it absolutely matters. Maybe not as much as November, but it still matters.
Scott, thanks for joining us and being a part of our program today, and appreciate all you do as Kansas Secretary of State to really keep things organized so the state can keep moving forward.
Well, thank you, and honored to be on the show and be able to talk about the great things in our office that we're doing for the state of Kansas.
Our guest today on Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times, is Scott Schwab, Kansas Secretary of State. Thanks for listening. Our program is brought to you by Worth Wealth Management, where you can live with confidence. I'm Gary Shorman.
Thanks for joining us for Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times, presented by Worth Wealth Management. Join us right here next week for another episode with host Gary Shorman. Until then, remember to move forward ever, backward never.